Now, sometimes modelling can seem like a bit of an endurance sport, especially if you have a model you're working on. There's loads of detail, loads of small parts. Just getting through all this geometry can be quite daunting, and it's more an exercise in patience over actual modelling skill. Now, the primary thing you're looking for in a modelling workflow is something that's going to cut the amount of modelling that you have to do. And in 3D modelling, the thing that's going to help you do this is symmetry. When you decide to model an object, the first thing you should do is look at the object and think, is any part of this object symmetrical? Now, some objects are symmetrical on one axis, and that will take you half the amount of modelling that you need to do. Some objects are symmetrical on more than one axis, and that further reduces the amount of work that you have to do. So in this video, we're going to be looking at how symmetry can save you time when modelling. So let's start by having a look at a couple of things to do with using objects with symmetry. Now, when you add say a primitive, like a cylinder, to the scene, the primitive is brought in at world center, and it's obviously given an orientation. The axis of this object is always placed at the center of the bounding box of the object. Doesn't matter whether you do this with a cube or a sphere or anything. Now, the same is true when you add a symmetry object to your scene. You do that by going to the generators list and choosing symmetry, and you can see that this is brought in at world center too. If I add my cylinder to the symmetry object, you can actually see that nothing has actually happened here, and that is because the cylinder is sitting on top of its symmetry twin, as it were. If I get the move tool and move this, you can see the symmetry is working down this center axis here because the symmetry object is placed at world center. One of the most important aspects of the symmetry object here is the mirror plane. This is currently set to ZY, which is left to right. If I move the cylinder, you see we get this symmetry. If I change this to XY, we have symmetry backwards and forwards. And if I change this to XZ, we now have up and down symmetry. Now, all of this is working very well because both objects were added at world center. Now, if I take this cylinder out, and now I'm going to add a symmetry object via the Alt or Option key, which is going to make this cylinder a child of the symmetry object. And you can see that works pretty much the same as it did before. Now then, if I take this cylinder out of the symmetry object, and now you can see that this object is no longer at world center. If I add the symmetry object via the Alt or Option key, the symmetry object is brought in at the axis point of this object. So now if I move the cylinder, you can see it's kind of offset over this side of the scene. Now, if you've already moved your object, around in your scene somewhere, and you want it to reflect at world center, you need to add the symmetry object and just drop this in like so. So that can be a bit of a gotcha sometimes when you have an object over one side, you add the symmetry object via Option or Alt, and you think nothing's happened. It's because the symmetry object's axis is actually sitting in the middle of the object. Now, you might notice that the symmetry object has a major drawback in that it can't actually mirror an object or merge these mirrored objects together. Now, there is a fudge that you can do for this, which I'll show you right at the end. But in symmetry, the objects do actually intersect with each other. So one of the most common ways to start actually modelling with symmetry is to take a polygon. I've taken a polygon here. This could be any object though. And essentially split this object down the middle and delete one side and put this into a symmetry object. So now anything I do over this side is reflected on the other side. Now, there are a few very useful parameters down the bottom here in modelling, and the first one is clamp points on axis. I'm just going to turn off both of these and we can see what they do. Now, if I take this polygon and I select this face and I inner extrude this, you can see I get this kind of effect. Now, if I go to Symmetry, turn on clamp points on axis, effectively what this is going to do is when I inner extrude it, it's going to clamp the points on the center axis, and you get this kind of result. So these points here are being clamped onto the center axis, and it enables you to make loops in Symmetry, and it's very useful to be able to do this. Now, there's also one other checkbox here that says delete polygons on axis. This has to do with extruding a surface in Symmetry that is residing on the center line. Now, if I extrude this down, like so, you can see I get this polygon. Well, there's actually two polygon faces here. The other's in Symmetry on the other side. You don't really want this at all. If you check delete polygons on axis, do this again, you can see that it removes that polygon and you can get these kind of results. Now, one word of warning here, this doesn't work by command control clicking and dragging for your extrusions. That doesn't work. You'd have to delete that and then you'd be left with this spare line. And you can see that that's a bit of a pain to get rid of all this stuff. Now, I save my Symmetry object by default with all of these settings on, and with my mirror plane set to ZY across left and right, because this is the most common type of Symmetry and it saves you having to reset this every time. And you just set this up and then say set as default. Okay, so that's the basics. So let's get on and have a look at some examples. So we're going to start here with a very, very simple example. We have this Batman logo, and we can see that this is obviously very symmetrical. And the Symmetry line is running straight down the middle like so. So we would only have to build this half of the object, and then we can Symmetry it over to this side. So I've gone ahead and set up a little scene here. Now, I've made this shape out of geometry, and we're going to be talking a lot more about creating shapes with geometry rather than splines, and just what the benefits are of doing this. And I stopped using splines for this kind of thing quite a while ago because the results you will get from this are much better. Now, I've obviously only had to build this half, and I would say this probably took me about 30 seconds to build. It's a pretty simple shape. Now, to get the result I want, basically what I've done is I've put this in to Symmetry. Now, if we look here, kind of done this on purpose, you can see we have some overlapping geometry here where this point here isn't quite on the center line. If you have that kind of thing, you could either move the point or you could come to your Symmetry object and increase the tolerance until those points weld together. So now I have the full shape. So what I've basically done is weighted some points here, just done this using subdivision surface weight, and then I've essentially subdivided it. And the result of that is a nice smooth shape. Now, the reason this is so much more beneficial over the spline extrude version is the topology is fairly even, or pretty even. It's all quad and it will deform really well. And I also have the benefits of being able to re-topologize this. If I wanted to bevel this out, I could create some nice beveled effects, and we'll be talking about that a bit later anyway. This will deform very well. If we look here, just come into the bend, you can see how smooth the deformation is. If I come to my twist deformer, you can see just how well this object is deforming. Now, to get this with a spline extrude, you're going to have to create the regular grid in the extrude, which won't give you as good a result as this. So there we have a simple shape modelled on one half, put into Symmetry, get a very good result when subdivided. Okay, for the next example, we'll have a look at something that has double symmetry. And a good example of this is this female USB connector. Now, obviously, we have symmetry running up this edge here. These two shapes are identical, and I'm sure this would carry on over to the other side. Now, to a certain degree, we have some symmetry up this edge as well. This shape here is obviously the same as these, and this would be symmetrical. So we would divvy this up again like this. Now, this bottom section here and these details, they're not symmetrical front to back, but they are symmetrical kind of left to right. So we could think of this area here being a separate issue here, where it's only symmetrical on this side and this side. So the plan here would be to create a cube, split it up into quarters, model all of this detail here, put it into double symmetry, and then join this area back up and just use single symmetry between these two sides. Let me give you an actual example of this in real world cinema 4D. Okay, so I'm going to go at this fairly fast. I have a cube here, and I've divided this 2 by 2 by 2. I'm going to make this editable. Grab my polygon selection tool, get rid of these end polygons. Then I'm going to select these polygons here, hit UI to invert, get rid of all this, and then optimize. So then this would go straight into a symmetry object for left and right. And then I'm going to add another symmetry object here and change this to XZ for up and down. So now I have pretty much what I had before. So the first thing I would do here is come in here, grab my move tool, grab this edge, just chamfer this to get the curvature on the edge. Maybe I could subdivide that. 3 is probably more than enough. So now I'm going to model in this detail here. Now the beauty of this being in symmetry 4 ways is I only have to do this obviously once. So deselect my edges, grab my loop tool, let's make a bit of a safety cut here. Edge mode. Then I'm going to grab these edges like so, get my slide tool, hit command, slide these in. Now for the sake of time, I'm just going to do kind of a bit of a simplified version of this. Just going to shrink this edge up here, grab these edges again, slide tool, clone these in. To create the gap, select these polygons and delete. Knife tool, loop mode, cut across here, edges, and here you can see I can make this detail fairly quickly, and it's happened on all four sides. I may just want to cut another edge here. Just move this up like so. So now I can do the same thing here. Clone tool. Clone this in like so. Now I want to scale this. Okay, so now it's probably best if I just grab a point, edge mode, same thing, clone in. So that detail is also done. I'm not going to worry about this little hole down here. I just want to kind of move through this. Then I would want to create these kind of extrusions like this. Maybe grab this edge here. Just bevel that, but I'm only going to bevel that sort of once. Sort of do the same here. I'm just using Command here to extrude these edges out. Go and grab this edge. Bevel like so. So now I've taken care of all of these details. Kind of want to come around the back here and work on this. At the moment, this symmetry object is doing the up and down, and that's the one I actually want to keep. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to the up and down one, and this to the left and right, like so. And then I'm just going to choose the symmetry object and hit C, and basically bounce that into geometry. Okay, so now I need to think a little bit about my topology here. And what I'm going to do is grab my plane tool, take this to this angle, and I'm just going to cut down, deselect those edges, cut down here. Go into point mode, basically just retopologize that a little bit. Then I can come into my knife, loop tool, and then basically just delete these polygons here. That takes care of my little corner detail. And then I just come to here, edge mode, extrude out a little bit, extrude out a bit more, just slightly scale that down, move it in, and then I can just pull that out like that and make that sort of extra detail there. And that is kind of essentially done as far as a very basic base mesh would go. Just go into poly mode, grab my extrude tool and just extrude that. I'm going to go inwards actually, which means my normals will be reversed. I just go to normals, reverse normals, and there you kind of have it. Now what I would do from here is go in and sort of sharpen all these edges up, eventually putting this whole thing into a subdivision. Looks rubbish at the moment because I haven't cut this. but that would be a fairly straightforward process, and we'll be looking at doing some detail cutting later on in the course. So that's another example where symmetry can be very quick when modelling what looks to be like a very complicated object, but actually it's a fairly speedy process. Up till now we've used symmetry on 2 axes, but you can actually use symmetry on all 3 axes if you like. I'll give you a quick example of this. Now this kind of technique is really good for making kind of tech objects. I'm just going to make a cube here, divvy it up into 4 polys per side. Grab my polygon tool, select these polygons, UI to invert, delete these, just optimize this quickly. So I can put this into symmetry on left and right, add this symmetry into a forward and backward, and then the final symmetry will go on the XZ, which is up and down. If I select the cube here, you can see I only have to deal with this geometry here. Go into point mode, select this point, and I can bevel this like so. Grab these edges, bevel these. Now you can see I've got some rather funky Fong tag issues. Take the edge breaks off, just reduce the Fong angle. Let's deselect these edges. So I'd quite like to make these into quads. So I could take these edges, Option X, I have this for connect. Grab these. Connect these again. Grab these points, this triangle. Let's go to mesh commands, collapse these. Then I also have these end-on lines here, but I can just remove these by going remove end-on lines. And now I'm all quads. Go to polygon mode, and I have these polys selected. And do an inner extrude here. Extrude this in. And you can see I get these nice kind of geometric kind of tech shapes. This could be some sort of sci-fi crate or something like that. Now, one of the drawbacks of symmetry is it doesn't like the bevel deformer. Like if I wanted to smooth this shape out, if I shift, add a bevel deformer, you can see that along the symmetry edges, where the bevel is happening, it's actually making the polys disappear where the bevel should be. I don't know whether that's some sort of glitch with the bevel deformer, but it certainly doesn't like symmetry. The only way to get round this is to make an edge selection. So probably the quickest way of doing that is to do a Fong break selection, which gets most of the ones and omits the outside edge, which is the edge we don't want to bevel. So I can just add a few more edges that I want to sharpen here, like so. Make a selection and then add that to the bevel deformer and turn it on. And now I get a more acceptable result. Make sure we have no Fong break rounding there. And you can see I get quite a nice fast result with these kind of shapes. Let's take our Fong tag down a little bit more. And you can see it would be very easy to add a lot of detail into this object just using these polygons here. A very fast way to make really complex tech shapes. But the bevel deformer is one thing that you should look out for when using symmetry. So to finish up, earlier on I was talking about this thing where the symmetry object can't actually mirror properly and the geometry actually intersects when it meets. So if I just make a quick tube here, and then I put this into symmetry, and let's say I move the tube, you can see what's happening here is that this is actually intersecting. Now if you want to get round this, there is sort of a little hack that you can do. So what you do is you make a cube, all with one segment, and we could just make this 1000. You want this to be quite large. And just copy this in like so. And then what I'm going to do is move this over on the x-axis, hold shift, and move it back half the amount, which is 500. So this is actually going to essentially act as a ball plane. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the cube in the ball, I'm going to put the tube as object A, and now we get this. So what I'm going to do, just go create single object, just say hide new edges. And you can see when I move the tube, I get this kind of effect. And now I'm going to put the ball in the symmetry object. And now I'm getting this kind of effect. Now you can do this in, I think, Max, you probably do it in most 3D applications, but the symmetry object just isn't up to this in Cinema. And you can obviously rotate, and you can get some pretty interesting shapes like this. Now because the cube only has one side, the ball is very simple. You know, you probably bounce this down to an object and then do a bit of cleanup, but it wouldn't be too severe. And this will work with really complex objects. You can come up with new shapes, but it is a hack, and until the symmetry tool can deal with this, this is the only way you can actually do this. So we'll see the symmetry tool quite a bit in the remainder of this course. So now you know how it works, you'll be able to understand very quickly how I'm using it to model a lot of stuff.